Daniel chapter 3, the image of gold and the fiery furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come up to the dedication of the image that he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into the blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you don't serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image that I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it. And he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of his strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we threw and tied up and threw into the fire?" They answered, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god other than the true God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, John, for reading. Please grab a Bible and keep Daniel 3 open. I'm Rosie, and I've been part of St Mike's Church family for 9 years. I'm married to John. We're both lawyers, currently navigating the joys and challenges of working from the same room at home. And we're parents to two boys, Zachy 9 and Sammy 6. Meshach, Shadrach and Abednego, easy to remember as my shack, your shack and a bungalow, are my Old Testament heroes. I hope you'll agree this is a stonking Bible passage. There's a big band, an angry king, a huge fire, a miraculous rescue, and national transformation. There's something for everyone, and it's pretty dramatic. There are 3 points that I want to pull out of this story. I may not be the only one whose memory is a bit like a sieve these days, so to help me remember them, with only a bit of a stretch, they all begin with a P. The reason Meshach, Shadrach and Abednego are my heroes, and the reason I love this story, is because of their powerful faith. These guys are amazing. They're able to look into the flames of the fire, quite literally, and say the words from verse 16.
King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the image of gold that you have made.
Our God is able to save us. But even if he does not, we won't bow to your idols. Nothing changes. I love these guys because they have such a big picture of God. They know he is an unlimited miracle worker. It is totally possible for God to swoop in, perhaps stop the furnace from being lit, perhaps lock the door so it can't be open. There are plenty of ways God could intervene to stop Meshach, Shadrach and Abednego being thrown into the furnace. But they recognise that God might not, and their faith is so powerful because they can hold together this huge vision of the awesome power of God with their realistic knowledge that God may not act in the way that they are so desperately hoping and praying for. Holding together those two concepts of an all-loving God, all-powerful, and our experience of the reality that God often doesn't answer even our most earnest prayers in the way we desperately hope, is powerful faith. It was tough then, and it is just as tough now, in St. Michael's, in the midst of this pandemic. For many months now, we've been praying to God that he will miraculously end this pandemic, that he'll reveal a vaccine, that we will stay healthy, that we won't lose our employment. And many of these prayers have not been answered in the way that we hoped. Can we cling on to the same faith of Meshach, Shadrach and Abednego, that our vision of the enormity of God doesn't change when these prayers aren't answered? Friends, this isn't easy. How did Meshach, Shadrach and Abednego do it? We're introduced to Meshach, Shadrach and Abednego in chapters 1 and 2 of Daniel. They are Daniel's right-hand men. We learn that they have practiced. They are practiced in trusting God when the going gets tough. They are practiced in hardship, here and earlier in chapter 1. We know later in the book of Daniel, that kids' church classic, when Daniel is thrown into the lion's den, that this is because Daniel won't stop faithfully praying. So my 2-minute take on why Meshach, Shadrach and Abednego have this powerful faith is prayer and practice. It's never easy, but it's easier to trust God with the big things when we're practiced in trusting him with the smaller day-to-day things. The more we can give over of our control and our lives to God, the more we practice, the more powerful our faith becomes. And of course, prayer. Pete Greig, in his writings about prayer, says that so much of prayer is simply showing up. It's persisting and continuing in prayer when the going gets tough. So I concede, I may be getting slightly carried away with my P's now, but my first P is powerful faith. My Old Testament heroes have a powerful faith because they practiced and because they prayed. My second P, the presence of God. I can imagine exactly how Meshach, Shadrach and Abednego prayed. Please, God, please rescue us from this furnace. We definitely don't want to burn to death. We know you can, God. Please rescue us. Please save us. It would show everyone how powerful you are. They definitely weren't praying, yes, Lord, please throw us into the fire. We want to be on fire for you, God. Whilst thankfully I have never stood on the edge of a blazing furnace, I have so often prayed exactly this prayer. Please, God, rescue me. Don't let this awful thing happen. Please let that medical test come back negative. Please rescue me from this awful situation that I just don't want to be in. God didn't rescue Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. The fire was turned up so much that it burned to death those who threw them into the fire. After what must have felt like the last opportunity for God to show up, our heroes are thrown in. And then, in their disappointment, they experience God's presence in the most tangible way possible. God is physically present in the fire with them. Whether it's Jesus, whether it's an angel, we don't know for sure, but God is there. Look at verse 24. King Nebuchadnezzar asks,
"Were there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods."
Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego aren't rescued. They are thrown into their worst nightmare, but Jesus is there with them. We, who live after Jesus, have the privilege, joy, and blessing of the Holy Spirit, the third person in the Trinity who lives inside us. God, the Holy Spirit, doesn't materialize for us only when we are facing our fiery furnace. God, the Holy Spirit, lives in us every hour of every day, from the most exciting to the most tedious, the most frightening to the most mundane. Their powerful faith allows them to experience the presence and the person of God so closely beside them. We've looked at the powerful faith of our heroes, the presence of God in the fire, and now my third P, the plans of God. King Nebuchadnezzar is an all or nothing man, and he gets angry pretty quickly. Verse 13.
Furious with rage, King Nebuchadnezzar summoned our heroes.
Verse 19.
King Nebuchadnezzar was furious. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual.
Having witnessed this miraculous rescue, he is now just as zealous for God. It isn't simply that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego are free to go on with their own private prayer life. Now their faith is transforming not only King Nebuchadnezzar, but the entire kingdom. Verse 29.
I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego,
now for the all or nothing drama,
be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned to piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way.
God's plans were so much bigger than our heroes could have imagined. God didn't just want to save them from the fiery furnace. His plans were to transform the king, even if the king got a bit carried away, and the whole kingdom. The powerful faith of our heroes, because they prayed and because they practiced, led them to experience God's presence in a new way. And God's plans were to use this to transform the king and the kingdom. That's why I think this is a stonking Bible passage, and I hope you agree. So to finish, I'd like to share 2 applications for us to reflect on. Firstly, the context of this amazing story is that our heroes were commanded to worship an idol. In their case, a huge gold statue. They were called by the king to bow down and worship it. Very few of us today are tempted to worship huge gold statues. Modern idols are more subtle than that, but they are just as powerful to us. In Ask Tim a few weeks ago, Tim gave a brilliant talk answering Rufus's Hicks question about whether God had sent the coronavirus. And if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it. Tim used a phrase that has really stuck with me. Our worship of the idols or the false gods of possession, consumption, and an Instagrammable lifestyle. The false gods of possession, consumption, and an Instagrammable lifestyle. I think a good indicator of what our personal idols are is when our thoughts wander off. Where is the first place they go? Where are we directing our time, our money, our energy, and our resources? What are the things we dream about? Where is our focus? For many of us, Tim brilliantly sums up so much in those three expressions: possession, consumption, and an Instagrammable lifestyle. It's so subtle and complex. It's not wrong to have possessions. It's not wrong to enjoy a delicious meal or a good holiday. And as a church, we're on Instagram. It's about when instead of these things serving us, we start to serve them. They take first place in our hearts, in our priorities, in our diaries, and in our finances. It's always a subtle shift, and often so subtle that we don't notice when it starts or how much it is growing. If you're willing, I want to encourage us all to take a moment at the end of this talk to ask God to be gently honest with us, to help us see the things that have taken first place in our lives above him, and the things that we are beginning to worship, perhaps even without realising. And if we want to ask God to help us to reset that focus, to persist in prayer, and have a powerful faithfulness like that of our heroes. The second application is about our own willingness not to be rescued. Of course, I want to be rescued. I'm going to keep praying for dramatic rescue for me, for my friends, and for my family, for our nation and for our world. But the question is, where is my faith and where is my vision of God if these prayers aren't answered in the way that I yearn for? If we take this step, we are in the best of company, Jesus. In Luke chapter 22, verse 42, before going to the cross, Jesus prays,
Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, but not my will, but your will be done.
In a different context, it's the same prayer as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Please, please rescue me from this horrific thing I don't want to face. But I love you and I will trust you and your plans, even if you don't rescue me. As Ash and the band lead us in worship, can I just encourage you to pause, to close your eyes, to open your hands, and just take a moment in God's presence to be honest with him. Ask God to show you the idols that you are serving and pray for his help with this. Ask God for more powerful faith if the rescue that you're praying for hasn't come in the way that you prayed. Let's invite God's presence now as we worship, and his presence in whatever situations await us on Monday morning.